Hi there, welcome back to Supercharge Fridays. How are you doing? It's been a while, it's been a week. 151 Fridays. We've been going live here on Supercharge Fridays. Come in the comments and say hello. We have a juicy topic today, and we are going to talk about manager and leader, like you've seen up in the description. So before we get on Stefano, who is a real I would say authority on this subject. Before we get on to all of that good stuff, I just want to quickly welcome you in and tell us where you're joining us from. Which city are you joining us from? I'm in Brussels. Stefan is going to join us from Montreal in Canada. And before we get started with all the good stuff, I wanted to say this week, I have just launched my first digital course on all things job interviews. If you or someone you know needs to work a little bit better at job interviews and up the ante a little bit, I have extracted everything from my brain into this program and it's live right now. So just launched this week. If this is something that you're interested in, I just quickly wanted to give a little plug to my course, my little brand new baby. Go to superchargeyourself.com/interview course. It comes with a fantastic bonus, which is a mock interview live with me in a safe Zoom space with a couple of other people. And yeah, I look forward to welcoming you into the program. So now, without further ado, we are going to bring in Stefano. We've got a lot of good stuff to talk to Stefano about when it comes to manager and leadership. Stefano, this is your third time. Welcome back to Supercharged Fridays.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here yet again. Third time's a charm.
Third time's a
Uh,
charm. I
yeah,
We had such brilliant topics. I remember the one last year we talked about was creativity, creative with a big C, creative with a little c, and all the good
yes.
stuff. So I feel like, we don't necessarily need you to introduce yourself, but I'm quickly going to say, so Stefano is a executive coach and a leadership facilitator based in Montreal, works with a boutique consulting firm called Papillon. And Stefano, let's get started. I want to ask you before we get started, are you a manager? Are you a leader? What are you? How would you describe your role in that sense?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, to answer that for so many people because there's these labels that we kind
Yeah.
of create. I
Yeah.
actually went and said, let me create one of those, remember those old vintage labels where people
Yes.
used to kind of label
Yes.
things, and we love to create things and categorize. And yeah, you know what? Which of these am I? Well, quite honestly, this is why I think this is an important topic because I really see myself as being both of these. And I think we need to realize that there are differences between the two. But
Mm.
it's perfectly possible to be a great manager and leader and vice versa.
Oh, okay. Okay. Love it.
So I'm both. I'm both.
You're both. Okay. In case I think I forgot, first I want to say hi and welcome to everyone who's joining us. This is so amazing. And of course, if you're watching us in the replay, lots of love to you on the replay as well. But live is live. Okay. If you've shown up and you're here live, this is amazing. We got Michigan, we got Finland, Winnipeg, which sounds very white and snowy right now, and Mumbai. It's so lovely to have you guys here. I totally forgot to warn our viewers that Stefano brings it. Okay. He brings it in more ways that you can count. We've got props, we've got everything going on. So you're saying you're both. Stefano, we love as human beings, we love binary thinking. It's just kind of how we are. Are you
Yeah.
this? Are you that? Are you manager? Are you leader? You're saying
Yeah.
I'm both and get used to it.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I think really what gets a little under my skin, it gets me a little frustrated, to be perfectly honest, is how many times I see these blanket statements online that
Yeah.
kind of pit leaders and managers against each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just unfortunate because I think it limits how we perceive each one when in fact we can integrate those two approaches. They are development strategies. And so why are we making them? Why are we making them fight when they can, in fact, benefit each
But
style?
but let's stay here for a second, Stefano. So
Yeah,
why does it tend to happen? Why is it this or that? Traditionally, even today, you do search results on manager leader, and there'll be like columns of differences between the two. Why has that
yeah.
thinking been there?
Well, you know what? That's a really great question. I mean, certainly, look, there are some people posting things online, and
Mm.
it's meant it's a quote, it's meant to inspire, it's meant to be motivational. And of course, it doesn't capture the big picture or offer enough context. So there's a part of that being misread, but I also just think there's no formal training for this kind of thing. And
Mm,
quite honestly, at Papillon MDC, we have a program that is dedicated just to trying to get people to understand these different ways of showing up and how they can marry very well together. So I just simply think it's that there's no rule book or manual for being a manager, for being a leader, and certainly not for distinguishing how those two can be fused together. And that's probably why, and I guess I often notice managers tend to kind of have a certain resistance when they hear someone speaking about leadership and vice versa. And really, at the end of the day, often many managers are already displaying many excellent leadership behaviors. So again, it's not a you versus them. It's more of a, oh, how interesting. I'm already doing this element. I don't have to see myself as something different. I can
mm,
just kind of see how I can maybe learn from this.
mm,
So
mm.
does that kind of answer the question as to
It
maybe
does.
why? Yeah,
It does. And there's something very interesting, and I never thought about it. And Risto says in his native language, in Finnish, the word for manager and leader is the same. That is so interesting.
interesting.
I
Yeah,
think because Stefano, you're also a French speaker. Isn't it the same thing in French?
not quite,
Gérant?
not quite. Gérant is manager.
Yeah.
Gérer means to manage. Certainly, leadership is a word that can also be used in French. It's a leader is a word that
Yeah.
has kind of, um,
Same with
but
Spanish because gerente is the same thing. Gerente, and yeah, it's been anglicized. Now we say líder. Líder in
yeah,
Spanish, it's leader. But
yeah.
um, it, I want to, maybe I'm oversimplifying it. Is it like every manager is a leader and yet every leader is not a manager? You know what I mean? Sometimes is it, or is that the
Yeah.
wrong way to go about it?
Well, look, I'm not going to be the one to state what's wrong or right, but what I will state is that I did see that comment even go up in one of the posts that we did for this today. Someone said, "Oh, I get it. What you're saying is, a leader can be a manager, but a manager can never quite be a leader." And some of the most incredible leaders I know happen to be excellent managers.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's necessarily to make that a generalization. I think I'd have a
Yeah.
lot of people in the comments writing, "How dare you?" Because
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think that rule exists. I think you can perfectly blend both. And the problem is I don't want to diminish that these are different approaches. There is power to a name. What's in a
Mm,
name? There's
mm,
plenty in a name.
mm, mm,
Management is a very specific kind of thing, right? If you're
mm.
talking about management, you are talking about planning and organizing, and you're talking about directing, and certainly a little bit of controlling and following up when things are urgent, or when there's specific timelines, or when there's no negotiation. Now, when we flip over to the leadership side, well, now it's a little bit more about vision and really embracing growth mindset and seeing potential in people and enabling those people to do their work and guiding and
Yeah.
really influencing even without the authority.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
are different things. However, some managers who are, or people who identify as managers mainly right now are probably saying, "Hey, well, I do plenty of that." Well, that's kind of my point. You're
Okay.
you're not you're not truly a different animal.
You're not a
Um,
truly different animal. It's kind of the same species, right?
kind of
So
exactly.
that's very interesting. And Abyss is asking, I have some questions on the topic. Please bring your questions and your comments. It makes this conversation so much more rich. If
Absolutely.
you have certain point of views, we especially love people who disagree. You don't always have to come and say how amazing everything is. That's not how we learn. That's not how we grow. So different points of view are welcome. Nairobi's in the house. It's amazing. It's really we've got a beautiful audience from around the world. Um, so Stefano, let's start with the two, right? So traits of a good manager, traits of a good leader, and they have so much in common. But let's start with the leader. And you
Hmm.
have worked with so many leaders around the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no
Absolutely.
wrong. There is no wrong. There is no answer is the same when it comes to this, and when people's definitions are so varied.
Yeah.
Based on your experience, right?
Hmm.
What is it
Hmm.
that makes a leader more effective than others?
Wow, that's a great question, actually. I do think that leadership effectiveness is something that we need to talk about. And to me, that's what a leader starts to focus on leadership effectiveness. And I think if we were to break down leadership effectiveness, we could probably break it down into two main categories. One is probably you're creating a culture for learning, and the other is you're creating a culture of vigilance. And so by learning, of course, some people say, well, isn't that just teaching? Sure, but of course, when I mean a culture of learning, I'm talking about really encouraging perspective taking and risk taking and decision making, and really getting people to, be engaged, motivated, inspired, so that they can contribute and really own, their decisions, their goals, their visions. And certainly, of course, we're trying to get alignment with maybe the corporate goals, but we still want that person to really be in an environment where they could learn. And vigilance is really this culture of oneness, right? This idea that we all care about the success of each other and we see ourselves like a unit. I always get this image of a symphony or an orchestra. It really doesn't matter how well each individual musician is if we're listening to the entire symphony. To
Yeah.
achieve a symphony, everybody has to kind of be looking out for each other. You can't have some people dropping their instruments or not being able to follow along. And the conductor makes it look easy, but of course, there's a lot of work that's been put in to achieving that oneness and that vigilance. So I think if you could do those, you're already off to a really great start as a leader.
So there is a very important combination of leading, conducting, but also managing, right? Got to,
Of course.
there's no way that it can be divorced, which is why you said I have both labels on you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I also think it's important to recognize that the leading doesn't have to happen with a position, of course. You don't have to have that management position in order to lead. You can engage people and motivate them and inspire them and create those cultures
Hmm,
without the title or position,
hmm, hmm,
though often it's a little easier if
hmm.
you also have the position, because you can use that position relative to others to serve them. And so that gives you a little bit maybe of an easier time as well. So, but yes, you're seeing what I'm saying. Like, there's power in a name, but there's also the ability to recognize, well, I get to choose which of these approaches I'm going to use for the specific scenario or situation.
Yeah, yeah. Achieve that oneness is so important, Lena, because what you're saying, right, Stefano, it sounds like it doesn't sound like I can hear the violin louder than the piano. Why is that happening? We don't
Yeah,
want superstars. We don't want little chickens. We want that
super.
sweet spot where you hear
Yeah,
everything well.
yeah,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
super team, right? That's what you
yeah,
really want.
yeah.
And of course, the outcome of this incredible unit, this oneness, this ensemble, which I love because in French that means together, right?
Mm,
A
mm,
great ensemble. I mean, the outcome that will be produced by a great ensemble will always greatly outweigh what one person alone could do or what
mm,
few could do. If
mm.
you've really achieved and people are showing up and bringing their best selves to the table, it's incredible what you can get when you have that oneness
Yeah,
established.
yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. I have a question here from Vishal, which I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit to the other side to make it more contextually relevant for today. He says he tries
Sure.
reaching out to senior leadership
Hmm.
in companies. It's not always
Yes.
easy, right? In these times, we are all told networking, all of that stuff. It's not easy. Now,
Hmm.
I want to talk to you from the other point of view, right? So
Yeah.
when you're a leader at,
Hmm.
you've got the authority, you've got the manager title, at the top, and you're also sort of that conductor, that leadership. What are some qualities that you look for when you want to mentor others and you want to bring out the best in them? How do you decide which person you select?
Wow, that's a great question because again, mentorship is
Mm,
yet a third development strategy. So the way
mm,
I see it, I
mm.
actually see it that you really have kind of like I drew a bit of a Venn diagram. You have these three sections,
Oh, show it.
and
I love Venn diagrams. It's my
very, very simple, right? You have basically three different kind of, I'm going to steal from my drawing over here. You have three different mindsets. You have the management mindset, you have the leadership, the mentorship mindset, and
mm,
you can have a bit of a coaching mindset or a coaching blend. And now the question becomes, which of these do I use, or which combination do I use?
So,
Or
just to make sure we all heard you correctly. So you said there were three mindsets: mentorship, manager, leader.
I would say management, mentorship, and coach. The
Management, mentorship,
mentorship,
coach. Okay.
the mentorship and coach created labels for those two, by the way, right?
Uh-huh.
The I got one of them backwards here. I can't tell. There we go. I think these are subsets that can be classified more under the chapeau of leadership. However, I said chapeau, hat, but it could be umbrella there. Though I think all of them fall under leadership personally. But they're a little bit different. And I love this quote by Mirella de Civita, which is actually, she's the founder and president of Papillon. I love the way she put this because it kind of always brings things into perspective. When you're managing, you know your position relative to that of others. And so you're going to use your position in service to others. When you decide that you're a mentor, and that's a specific mindset, well, now you're going to open yourself up to being questioned. And of course, your goal here is that you respond with the aim to inspire. And you're hoping that that person will see alignment with what you're sharing, with what they're trying to overcome. And when you're a coach, well, now you are never the expert. You're never right. You simply just are. And here you're trying to allow that person to find their own solutions. You're guiding their thinking so that they can be empowered to solve something and overcome something on their own, rather than having to rely on, let's say, the manager with the expertise to solve the problem. You're giving them that opportunity to solve it so that they can also own making the decisions and solving it, and kind of know what it's like, whether you succeed or you fail. You need to learn to own that, and you're giving them that opportunity if you want them to develop, of course. So I love those three ways of seeing it.
Got it. So for someone, right, who's trying to approach senior leaders, what, as a senior leader, would be some sort of selection criteria that this person makes a good mentee for
Right.
my mentorship development?
Yeah. So if you know that, mentorship means someone who is open to questioning, well, then you might already, based on your experience with this individual, you might say like, well, I've had conversations with this person. They were very forthcoming. They shared a lot. But quite honestly, when you're not quite certain, one of the best things to do is quite honestly be transparent and have that conversation and says, hey, I would love to look for a mentor. And quite honestly, you're one of those people that popped into mind. And I would love to let you think about that and see what your thoughts are. Or maybe there's someone else you could suggest if you don't feel you're right. But at the same time, to ask and have that very open conversation, I mean, that's probably, I always say, go to the source. And you don't demand that they be your mentor, of course, but you open that question up and say, would this be something of interest to you? Usually there's a benefit both ways for the mentor and the mentee. So that might be something of interest.
Absolutely. Which also, so one of the things to keep in mind is, to answer this question, is what Stefano said at the back, right? You want that Venn diagram, you want the sweet spot of someone who has some coaching capability as well, and obviously wants, to be a mentor, but also you've got the third, the management, right? You want someone who's got that in the middle, because you don't want somebody who's only giving you answers, because then it makes us lazy thinkers.
It does. And advice advice is fantastic. Sometimes you will turn to your manager for expert advice. That's why the manager is there. They can offer that. But you know how advice works, right? I mean, you get really great advice from someone and you may build a little bit of a dependency on that person and say, this is the greatest person I know to get my answers. If it doesn't work out for you, the advice backfires, you might think the very opposite and says, I am never turning to that person again because they gave me bad advice. And so sometimes advice isn't really the most useful thing in the moment. However, if you're taking on a mentorship role, of course, you will share experiences and you're hoping that they'll see some alignment. But of course, you're not going to hold them to it necessarily. You're not going to oblige them to follow the advice that you've shared. You're simply bringing it to the forefront so that they can perhaps see what maybe resonates with them and how they can kind of maybe take some of that and make it work for them.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And also, yeah, it's a good point worth highlighting. What Risto said, what you said earlier, right? Use your position as an asset for serving, and
Absolutely.
not only influencing
Which
and
is where I
persuading.
think some of those this is maybe where the culture online has gone wrong. Sometimes what I notice is they say, being a manager is about telling people what to do. And
Yeah,
I mean, that's a blanket statement. Certainly there are
yeah,
moments where you are telling, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's a very narrow way of seeing it,
yeah,
right? It's not just about telling people. You have an opportunity to serve them
yeah,
in many different ways. Your position can allow so many things that you may be able to offer them in order to get the task done, in order to
yeah.
get the problem solved.
Okay, interesting. Now, I want to let's talk about um, two things that can either harm us, sorry, hurt, yeah, help us or hurt us, right?
Yeah,
And everyone has their opinion on it. They're so cliche. Some of these words are buzzwords, they're overused, but we want to hear Stefano's version
yeah,
of mindset and self awareness and how they can be our greatest ally to help us
yeah,
to manage and to lead.
yeah. That's really really great. Look, I think mindset will determine how you listen and how you communicate.
Hmm.
Um,
Give an
if you're
example of that,
it
Stefano.
well, certainly I can give an example. I mean, we sometimes don't recognize what we say and how it's interpreted or impacted by someone. Example, let's say I had a team working for me and they were working tirelessly on a challenge, right? And have been doing overtime. They've been struggling to get this solution, and they finally are able to come up with something innovative, and they're super proud. And they come to me and they say, Stefano, fantastic news. We've been working overtime for 2 weeks. We are tired, but guess what? Fantastic news. We found an innovative solution. You're going to be so excited to hear this. And the first thing that I say to them is, are we going to still make the deadline? So
Mm,
this is what my mindset was thinking. And in that moment,
mm,
I was probably in manager mode because as a
mm.
manager, I'm thinking of deadlines. I'm thinking of the impact that things have on other things. And, so now I dove right in. I kind of maybe reacted. And what it tells the person who heard this is, wow, that is what he was listening for. And that is what he cares for. And they may in turn turn to the team and say, guess what? He didn't hear the part where we are tired and that we found something fantastic. He asked us if we're going to make the deadline. Could you believe him? And it's unfortunate because that may not have been my intent. But of course, in some moments, you need to reflect there before you engage and say, hold on, how am I showing up right now? Now, with practice, this becomes easier and easier. Maybe a follow-up question to the first one may have kind of made things a little softer. But what's interesting there is you could see that my mindset went right into communicating what I was listening for. And often when we're in the mindset of a manager, what we're focused on is problem solving for a solution.
Right. And
We're
isn't that
thinking,
also based on context? Like there's a deadline coming up. So obviously he has to, he's worried about that.
right. Well, so this is where that mindset would be more important. If there's an urgency example, we tend to go into manager mode. When there's longer term development and we are seeing potential in some growth in somebody, we're more likely to engage in mentorship or coaching because we have that ability to have that more long term vision. But of course, when someone needs a manager in the moment because there's an urgency or there's pressure, certainly you might have to put on your manager hat. Nothing wrong with that. That's what's
Nothing wrong
needed
with
in that
that. In
moment.
fact, if
No,
if you don't put it on, there's a catastrophe waiting to happen. And forget leader,
likely,
right? Yeah.
likely, and it causes frustration in people too, as well, right? When they're struggling. Now, if I had someone show up at my door at 3 p.m. and there's a deadline at 5 p.m. Okay. And so now's not the time to say, let me see how I can get this person to
Sure.
grow in this moment. I would put
Sure.
on my management hat on and say,
Yes.
let's get this done. However, in the back of my mind, I might be thinking, I've observed that the
Mm,
last three mandates, whenever push comes to shove and we're right at the
mm,
looming deadline, this person tends to go through struggles. You might say, I'd love to see this person be able to overcome that. and let me understand more about how we can get this person maybe to
Okay.
get past this.
Yeah.
So
So the
that could
bigger
be
picture.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah. Yeah.
bigger
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. And I want to get into a few questions because they're very interesting here. I can see some
Absolutely.
questions. So Lena says,
Hmm.
how can you be a good leader when the organizational system limits the manager or leader, that limits the autonomy and hence,
Hmm.
the employee engagement and motivation?
Yeah, I hear this a lot, and it's a very good, it's a relevant point. I get it. It's not always easy. But a
Hmm.
lot of people actually say to me when we're going through some form of training or even in coaching, they'll say, hey, I hear what you're talking about in terms of, being a better leader, showing up
Hmm.
as the leader I want to be. I'm not getting that from my manager. And so I always ask, okay, but are we speaking about your manager in this moment, or are we speaking about you? What is in your control?
Ah,
Right? What can you do?
yeah.
I certainly don't think what Lena has written is not a factor that many people are thinking right now. But I always think, okay, so what can you do?
Hmm.
And so I don't see it as a good excuse. And I'm not saying that was an excuse, but for those who say, I'm not getting the leadership qualities that you're telling me about from my manager, so why are you telling me to do this with
I
my
mean, it's
people?
fair, right? We feel a little bit cheated.
You do, but at the same time, well, what can you most
Yeah.
readily change? And
Yeah.
also, you are in a position now, if you know how you learn best, what works best for you, well, then maybe now you can have that conversation with someone specific or a group of people to have that conversation. Say, hey, I learn best when, or I'm looking to grow here, or I want to step into that more manager leader role. I feel that maybe I can take on more independence. Can we have that conversation? Is this
Okay.
something that, and just open up that door? Sometimes what we do is we kind of come up with a rule that's kind of written in stone and saying, oh, this company won't do that, or they haven't been doing that. So that's just the way it is. And I'm stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Lena, we want to help you, right? So based on what Stefano is saying, what are you thinking? What are some things that you can control? Because it's impossible to say, I mean, it's a very strong statement, but it's impossible to say I can't control this or I can't control that because you are at a certain position. You've been,
Right.
selected to be there. You have some influence. But obviously, this is not just about Lena. This is something that is very pervasive, right?
Yes.
So let's make this as interactive as possible.
Hmm.
All right, we're moving on. Navida says we always look at conflicts between leaders and managers. Shouldn't both be leaders in their own space? How can a leader mentor a manager to lead? Are you following? It's quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think she's summing up a really great
Yeah,
aspect, I think, of what we've
yeah,
been talking about. Um, you know, shouldn't they occupy their own space? Well, yeah, they should.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
I think the first step is having these conversations.
yeah.
Now, if a manager feels that they would love to be mentored to become a better leader, well, then if you've recognized that in yourself and that's who you desire to become, that's why we call ourselves Papillon, by the way, at Papillon, because Papillon means butterfly. So you can
Yeah,
transform into who
yeah.
you want to be. So you have that opportunity to have that conversation with your manager and say, hey, I'm looking to step into more of a leadership space. I know that that may not mean a position here, but I do want to learn and grow in that direction. Would you be open to finding some ways that you can help me do that? So this way it leaves it very wide open. The person may not feel that they're the appropriate mentor, but they may see other opportunities and say, hey, would you be open to a mentor in the company? Or sometimes companies, they'll say something like, oh, I bet you didn't know we had a mentorship program already in place.
Hmm.
Is that something you're looking to be a part of? And especially when it's a large organization, sometimes these things can exist and some employees aren't even aware that these resources are there. But starting that conversation, how can we get me moving into that direction, is, to me, it always comes back to communication and conversation, and saying, okay, how do I
Especially,
make?
yeah, especially
Yeah,
uncomfortable conversations because we're not going to
it's
get
yeah,
it if we don't go below the surface.
yeah, absolutely. And to me, that's a sign of leadership right there, when you can actually hold a difficult conversation the right way.
Yeah.
That's a leadership attribute right there. That is something that people can work on right away, day to day.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And Risto says it's very interesting. The third element of the mindset is what we see or what we focus on.
Yeah.
That's a critical one. And
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you this. So Bharat says being a first time manager in a workplace environment, I think you touched upon it earlier. How do we stay clear, or at least less affected by company politics, and yet there are some unwritten rules, and you want to align with those as well?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, again, um, staying clear, it's very difficult to know what exactly are we staying clear of. I know certainly there is bureaucracy and red tape in organizations. It's just a part of the work world. The question becomes, I mean, you need to reflect on what it is that you're trying, what are your intentions,
Mm,
and
mm,
if you're unclear on something, again, I always say, well, maybe then a conversation has to be held. Maybe
mm,
if you think you're going to venture into territory where you're going to start ruffling feathers, well, maybe to prevent that, you need to have more information or have a conversation with someone and quite honestly say, I don't want to ruffle feathers. This is kind of my intent, and let me explain to you why I want to do this. I want to lead my team and do this for this reason. I certainly don't want to, ruffle any feathers. Is there any conflicts that you're seeing? What are you seeing here for me? At least you're not, you can't be blamed for having done anything wrong because you're quite honestly just trying to make sure that you're now the unwritten rules. If they're unwritten and unspoken rules, those I mean are very difficult to navigate. But the question becomes, what am I trying to achieve here? And does this completely go against what I think those unwritten rules are expecting of us? It's a little difficult to kind of answer that without knowing, well, what kind of rules are we talking about? But as long as you have those conversations, then at least you'll be in a better position to say, okay, well, at least now I understand this a little bit better, and I don't have to worry as much. I can sleep at night, not worrying that I'm kind of veering off course here.
yeah, no, very true. And Bharat, feel free to write to me as well on LinkedIn. I also have an article that maybe that will be interesting for you to read, and it's about the fact that why is politics considered a bad thing? Why
Right.
does politics have to be bad? It doesn't have to be bad, and we all do politics whether we know it or not. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be the other side. We don't have to other it and make it dirty. We've been doing politics
Yeah.
since we were in kindergarten. It's not a bad thing. It's just human.
Yeah.
One of the one of the rules, written or unwritten, is part of being human and living in a
Yeah.
society.
Yeah, and certainly when we see those politics as this big dark cloud, and
Yeah,
we tell
yeah.
ourselves that we can't do anything because of this big dark cloud,
We've
it
already been
becomes
doing it for so
yeah,
long.
yeah, and again, to me, it always goes back to okay, so what is in your control? So if you think
Mm.
this is what's going on, what can you control in your environment? Um, I mean, now of course, if it's radically different than what you believe that dark cloud is saying, you need to check in first before you react, and you want to cover your bases, make sure you fully understand what it is you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. So if I think if there are no other questions, right? I want to do a quick recap of what we talked about today. So, we talked about why it's not a good idea to pit leadership and management sort of against each other. We just covered how mindset and self awareness are one of the most powerful allies we will ever have, not just in our career, but in our life. What
Yeah.
does effective leadership look like? And before we end, Stefano, is there anything else we've not covered? And what would you like someone who's watching today to walk away with?
Well, certainly, I would love to have people walk away with this idea that if they were exclusively seeing themselves as either a manager or a leader, that there is room for them to grow in both directions. That there is this ability, and so now Risto, who I know is on watching here, said, "Are you going to bring the strings back?"
Hmm.
Remember, I the thread.
Yeah,
So I did bring
last
them
time.
back here, and so again, like I always say, like you're one person, but there's all these different strands of who you can be and show up. You can have that strand of coaching in you, that blend of coaching. You can have that mentorship. You can have that leadership and management. And the question becomes, which one of these do I need at different moments? And you can be more than just that label. You can have all those labels around you. And I hope people are seeing the positivity in that, the ability to say, oh, wow. So you're right. I've been reading all these things about leadership that I feel minimize or vilify management. And it doesn't have to be that way, does it?
Hmm.
And vice versa. You know, a
Mm,
leader shouldn't be looking at management saying, "Oh, management is like that's first level stuff," and like, you know, I've evolved beyond being just a manager and now I'm a leader. No, management is still a very important element of leadership that you still need to consider daily. So I'm hoping that's what people get out of it, like this opportunity for them that's before them to grow in the direction that they want to grow in, right?
exactly, exactly. And if you want to be both, then be both, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm walking away with it. Do you remember this movie Dirty Dancing?
Yes, yes.
Patrick Swayze, nobody puts baby in a
Baby,
corner.
that's right. That's right.
You want to go dance, dance. You want to sing, sing, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to fit in a box because the world loves to put us in boxes and put labels.
That's why I
And
created these. Yeah.
the reality is that
That's
we're
why I create
wearing both.
these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Stefano, this has been so cool. Thank you so much for being with us today. And thanks to everyone who's been watching us live and with your beautiful comments. It makes the conversation so rich. As a mentor, you respond with the aim to inspire. Absolutely beautiful. And your strands rock, Stefano. Make sure you follow Stefano. He's very active on, Stefano, you're very active on Instagram. That is kind of also more your creative juices, but of course he's
Yes.
on LinkedIn as well. If you want to get in touch with him, I'll make sure he's already tagged in on LinkedIn. But Stefano, what's your Instagram handle?
It's just my name with a an underscore between the Stefano and the Lollo. Actually,
Stefano,
very
and
simple.
I'll make sure I insert that in the comments on LinkedIn. This has been amazing. Thank you guys for joining us live. Wish you a lovely Friday and a lovely weekend. And I shall see you at the same time next week. Stefano, you're amazing as always. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Sonal. Thank you. Bye, everybody.